So welcome to ELT in Chile again. So a podcast about teaching English in Chile and now teaching online and also going back to face-to-face classes. In this video episode, we're interviewing Graham Hall. So Graham, I'm going to provide, let's say, some of your information here, and then we can start with the questions. So Graham Hall is a senior lecturer in applied linguistics at Northumbria University, United Kingdom, where he teaches in the University Master of Arts Biolinguistics for TESOL and also in the MA TESOL programs. He's been involved in English language teaching and TESOL for over 20 years, I guess, working as a teacher and teacher educator. Graham Hall is an applied linguist with a particular interest in language teaching, specifically English language teaching, ELT, which is also the name of the podcast, ELT in Chile. So he's interested in the debate surrounding language teaching methodology and classroom practice, and also in exploring ways in which teachers might understand and reflect on their own classrooms, and also on their own practice, absolutely. Graham has published research on the professional methodological literature of ELT, and also the critical debate surrounding the role of English and of the English language teaching in the world. She holds an MA in linguistics for ELT and also a PhD in applied linguistics. So welcome, Graham. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me in this.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Well, like I said before, thank you very much. The idea is like, to talk about, let's say, your experience and, and also how you're let's say involved in actually here I have your book.
Thank you for that.
It's a very interesting book. So it's one of my favorite books. Actually, I recommend, that book.
I didn't know you were going to do that, but it's always good.
A surprise. So, I have some questions for you, and maybe you can share, let's say, some of your experiences. One of the first questions I usually ask people is like, how did you become interested in language teaching and education, or how did you get involved, let's say, in this profession?
It's a good question. Of course, everybody's different. So I kind of come as for a lot of people, I come from a family of teachers. So my mother was a teacher, my dad was a teacher, my aunt was a teacher, my great aunts were teachers. So I decided that I was never going to be a teacher, consequently. And of course, it's like that line from the film The Godfather. Just when you thought you get out, they'd pull you back in. So maybe there was a touch of inevitability there. But what, like many people of my age and background, I kind of graduated from university in the early 1990s, and at that time, for better or worse, probably worse, people in my position who were British had the opportunity to take a CELTA course and go into English language teaching. It was an opportunity for us then. I look back on it now with quite a lot of misgivings and reservations, but as a 22-year-old, it was an opportunity to take advantage of all the privileges I was given. And like I say, I look back now and think, wow, there's all sorts of issues there. But so that was how it happened. I actually was a graduate of geography, wanted to do something outside of the UK, took the CELTA like many people. And then after not too long, after a year or so, I came back to Britain, and I actually trained as a secondary school teacher in Britain. And then thought, okay, that was a sort of commitment to teaching, as it were. But I actually enjoyed teaching English more than I enjoyed teaching geography, and so went back into English language teaching. So after a period of kind of dabbling of about a year, I thought, teaching is kind of it's something I enjoy and something I get quite a lot out of, because it's about people and once you kind of get yourself in the mindset. I was also in the world, luckily in the world of kind of the more private language school and British Council language school world at that time, which also, to be utterly selfish, avoided lots of the difficult problems of trying to teach teenagers in a big state comprehensive school of 1,500 kids. So I'm not making any honourable claims about my career. I kind of, time and again in my early stages, took the easy option, which was a result of the opportunities of my particular background and so on and so forth. I make no claims to say that it was fair, and I make no claims to say that I had any expertise at that time, but that was the opportunities I was very, very lucky to have. So that's how it started.
And also, well, you make a very good point in a way that we probably start teaching from different experiences, and life takes you in a specific
Yeah.
or different direction. So in a way, maybe your life also took you or put you in that direction of maybe teaching, and also maybe teaching in private schools, because it can also.
It was interesting because obviously, as I say, it was the early 90s, and at that time there were lots of kind of political changes in the world, and it was an opportunity to go and see political changes firsthand. So as I think it's not, I don't think you said it's in the blurb at the start, but we might touch on. I went first and taught in Poland and Hungary, and these were the early 90s, just after the end of the Cold War of that time, and it was just an opportunity for someone like me who was quite interested in sort of that kind of thing. Current affairs, changes in Europe. There's an opportunity to go and live in countries, and again, I can hear the privilege in what I'm saying, but that's how it was back then.
Yeah, I mean that was your experience, and then you said that you trained to be a secondary school teacher.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I trained to be a geography teacher, and I think the big difference, and this is something that's quite interesting, is certainly somebody who worked in the private language school sector at that time. Obviously, people were choosing to study English, whereas kids were being forced to study geography. So you can kind of start to see issues of motivation and things like that. And I don't know, maybe I was okay at geography teaching. It's not for me to say, but actually the easier option was to teach people who were more motivated and chosen to do something.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe it can be that can be something that's more rewarding, like.
Yeah, well, more rewarding, but certainly yes. I mean, there's different pressures, but it was as a young man an easier option for me, at least.
Okay, very good, very good. And Graham, what are you currently teaching, or what are you working on? Like, are you teaching?
Well, yeah, you kind of traced a little bit of my professional profile. So after some time, like many people in my position, after some time working outside of the UK, I came back to the UK, and I think what's interesting in the way that I describe my career is the way that it does link into kind of global trends. I came back to the UK in 1998, I think it was, and I started working in a British university, Northumbria, as an EAP teacher. And I suppose the connection to kind of global events was really quite near the start of the sort of internationalization of education, where students from all over the world would go to different countries, and universities at that time were to some extent playing catch up with a number of students from different cultural and different linguistic backgrounds. And so there was quite a boom in recruiting language teachers in British universities to try and deal with students who weren't British, and to try and work with them to help them in their studies. And from then, these things kind of progress over time. The unit where I was working developed a master's course. I think we all wanted to work in language teacher education, and then from there on we developed so the master's course, as you outlined, was for teachers, and then we developed a bachelor's course which was language studies, linguistics, if you like. And there's some language teaching methodology in there, but it's also linguistics, including pragmatics, semantics, and all the rest of it, and also sociolinguistics. And so over time, I sort of migrated towards, rather than teaching English per se, I work and talk to teachers about teaching English. So I can't really make any great claims to be an English language teacher per se, although I've been in the field a long time. And to be honest, I suppose it'll sound very glib. I like talking to teachers about teaching.
It's great,
because I can learn about the world and learn what happens around the world, and
absolutely,
and also hopefully help teachers think about their own teaching. But I have to say that I do something for them, I guess, because that's part of the job. But actually, what's in it for me? I can learn from what's going on.
Absolutely.
So now I work in language teacher education, I guess.
Yeah, and also, that's one of the main components. Classroom reflection, like the experiences, what you see in the classroom every day.
Yeah, that's teach. Right. It's a funny balance, isn't it? Because if you work in language teacher education, obviously there's things that you are said to know, or things that you claim to know. But actually, I think the way I see it is I think the first question in language teacher education, I try and, even for myself, but with people that I work with students on the program who are practicing teachers, is try and work out what we actually do. What do we do in the classroom?
Yeah.
Because classroom decision making is so rapid, and we're running between jobs or running between classes, and we kind of make decisions because we make decisions. Something we have to do. What are we doing? So an interesting question is on language teacher education programs that I work on, at least, is when people have the opportunity to step back, to ask them, so what is it that you do then? What do you do? What do you do in terms of error, corrective feedback, and what do you do in terms of own language use, and what do you do in terms of group or pair work, and try and get people to clarify what they do, and then clarify the principles for it that they think they follow. Well, I noticed the emphasis on what that they think they follow, and then from there, it's a question, isn't it, of thinking through what other possibilities there may be. And then this is the key bit, and so far so good. I think I'm in a reasonable position to ask those three questions of teachers. What do you do? Why do you do it? Here are the alternatives. But then it goes back to the teachers. Are the alternatives likely to be more effective in your context? And that's not really a question that I can answer, because I'm not working in that context. And finally, are the alternatives, if those alternatives are preferable, are they feasible in your context? And as soon as you get onto the in your context questions, that's where I think as certainly for myself as a language teacher educator working in the UK, then you have to let go. And it's about prompting people to go through that process of reflecting on those 5 questions for themselves. What do you do? Why do you do it? What are the alternatives? Do they work? Are they feasible? I mean, it's terrible. I've just summed up my entire attitude to language teaching education in 20 seconds. I'm not sure that's a great recruitment drive for my courses.
No, but
that's kind of how I see it.
No, but I think it makes sense, because like now with all the, let's say, different types of courses that you can find, maybe for teacher training, like maybe those are the main questions, like, okay, so now I take a course, and then, okay, so what am I going to do with all this information now? How am I going to apply it or use it in my own classroom?
Yeah. Is it even applicable?
Exactly.
Yeah, is it applicable? That's right.
And then let's say talking from that perspective, I've taken a few courses online, and during the pandemic, they were very useful. There was one that talked about, or that focused on assessment. That it was, then of course, the interesting thing was that there were teachers from different countries, and it was so difficult to try to agree on, let's say, some point.
But that's okay. Yeah, I think that's absolutely the important thing, isn't it? And I because context is so important. Clearly, we, in an ideal world, we would kind of all like to follow a nice, clear set of principles, but it's not. But context matters so much in terms of what's the expectation of the learners, or the learners' parents, or the schools. What are we teaching for? Are we teaching for exams? We might not like teaching for exams because we might think that assessment is the great evil thing, but it's a reality, and it gives people opportunities and all of those things. And who am I to say somebody else is wrong? As long as somebody's thought something through and reached a decision or a way of seeing the world that's reflective, then I think that's probably enough. That might not sound like a lot, but for me, that's probably enough. Just getting people to think through, well, okay, I could do that, but I'm not quite sure that it works, so I'll do this instead.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the reality is that, let's say, English has become, let's say, a sort of product for people to, advance in life, depending on the type of school, like from the school they choose, the university they go to, or let's say now the opportunities that many people actually here in Chile would like to go abroad, so for in that case, they need to pass an international exam, and they have to prepare for that. But so the people now have realized that English, and also learning English gives them a great advantage. So that's why it's become, let's say, so necessary for, let's say, actually to have good teachers, and universities are actually trying to recruit good teachers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And this, I mean, there's so much value-based stuff underpinning it, isn't there? I mean, again, it's easy for me to say. I mean, there are clearly issues or difficulties with the extent to which English has become important in individual lives and the opportunities it offers. What happens to those that don't speak English? What happens to other languages? What happens to there's lots of problematic issues which we could talk about for days.
Yeah.
And we might worry about those, and so in language teacher education we might discuss those things, but ultimately then life and teaching, it seems to me, unfortunately, is a set of compromises to make the best for our students and ourselves, given the context we're working in. It'd be lovely not to teach for assessment purposes, but life's not like that.
Yeah, exactly.
For many people.
There must be some sort of assessment, that, let's say, at some point.
Yeah,
right?
because assessment is what allows people to progress. Without assessment, I can't believe I'm saying this. Usually I'm one to pick holes in assessment, but assessment allows people to progress on merit, in theory.
Absolutely, and also, well, in terms of language, language teaching and language learning, it's very difficult to measure for students, when they feel that they are not progressing. It's like, especially when you have maybe an oral test and they say, like, teacher, how am I doing? How did I do? Like, so it's like, okay, today you learn like 10 new words. That's not something you can quantify very easily. So assessment is absolutely necessary. Yeah. Very good, very good. So here, well, I've read this book. It's a very interesting book.
Oh, wow. Okay. Keep showing it. This is fantastic. Yeah. So thank you.
So let's say, what led you to write this book? Or I mean, because writing a book requires a lot of work, actually, and it probably took you some time to plan it.
Some time. So that's a So I was fortunate to be contacted by the series editors, who were Guy Cook and Ron Carter, and they'd maybe, I don't know, they'd maybe spotted bits and pieces that I'd done before, which they'd liked. So they asked me if I would like to contribute to the series they were launching. And what was like many things in life, it's fortuitous. What was fortunate was they asked me at a time where I had an opportunity, a gap opening up in terms of time around. I had young kids, so I wasn't going out very much. But also, I'd been teaching on a master's program at that point. I think they got in touch in 2010, I think it was. And so I'd been teaching on a master's program for about 7 years. And fundamentally, which had helped me refine my thinking, fundamentally, that book at that time was a distillation of how I saw the field in terms of what I thought people on master's programs, or what I thought language teaching professionals might want to think about. So if we go back to the sort of my somewhat glib 5 questions: what do you do? Why do you do it? What are the alternatives? Okay, how does this fit your context? Those were the principles underpinning it. And so what the book set out to do was take a look at the kind of key areas in the field, the classroom, the method, the learner, the context, and then work through, okay, what do you do? That was the first section of each of those 4 areas. Then here are the ideas. Then what will you perhaps do in the future? So it's quite a lot of putting putting my interpretation of the field out there, putting the possibilities out there. Such and such says this, but such and such says that. Okay, how does that work for you? And that's how it went, and that's kind of how the book is organized. Rather than moving from theory to practice, it moves from practice to theory. It starts with the question: what do you do? What happens? What do you do? And then it starts to introduce the theory and theories, and asks teachers, if any read it, to then kind of process those combinations of what they do and where they are, what other ideas are out there, and start to make decisions as to whether they are happy and effective in their current practice, which is okay. It's not a book that sets out to necessarily change what people do. It's a book that sets out to help people think through why they do what they do. That's really it.
Yeah. That's why, let's say, I like this book so much, because it goes from that. It's not telling you this is what you have to do. It's basically, okay, basically, why do you believe what you believe in? Basically, why do you think?
Yeah. That, I mean, it's nice that you and have picked up on that, because that's really what it sets out to do. I wouldn't. Obviously, I need to claim that I kind of know the literature and I know what's in the field, but I don't want to claim that I've got a huge expertise. Like we say, go back to the start of the conversation. You know, it's not for me to say, here you are in Chile, I know what you should do. All I can say is, this is what people say. What do you make of it in your context? And that's really what it sets out to do. And so I kind of had the timing of the invitation to write it was very fortunate, because I had this kind of idea in my head. This is what I wanted to do, and this is how I work with teachers. And then it basically took me a year to put what was in my head down on paper. So obviously, writing, you know, you've written, writing can be the world's worst thing, and until it's done, and then it's fab. But I actually at least had I already had a framework in my mind of what I wanted to do, and then it was just getting what's in there onto paper. We can always say that about writing.
That's very easy to do, but again,
we've all got ideas. It's how to get the ideas out. That's the problem.
Absolutely, in a very interesting way. But I mean, every time I and actually I've seen people recommend this book, and also,
oh goodness gracious, we need to move on. It's way too flattering.
No, but this is a very interesting book, so I'm going to show it here one more time.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Actually, this is the second edition of the book, because the first one was.
That's right. So for those that are actually listening to this wasn't prearranged. I didn't ask Jose to
show the
plug my book. That's not. This is all lovely. But
I was looking. Let's say I was looking for the book in my bookshelf. So I saw it, and I'm like, oh, there's the book. Very good. Well, probably we're going to talk about, let's say, what happened, not maybe during this pandemic, because I think those 2 years, of course, it was like emergency teaching. It was a very difficult situation for, let's say, everybody. So how do you think like maybe your teaching was affected, both negatively and of course positively, during the pandemic?
It's such a great question. Obviously everybody will answer in ways which might have similarities but have their own different emotional experience of it as well. I think it's an interesting one to talk about, isn't it? We all had practical experiences of managing technology and managing learners through technology and teaching out of our rooms at home and not leaving the house. But it was also, in many ways, increasingly over time, an emotional experience, it was an experience that different people dealt with in different ways in terms of the emotions. I can't think of a better way of discussing it. How could you process the craziness of what was going on in the world, and the fact that you weren't leaving your house very much, and the fact that your teaching had changed in ways that you weren't expecting? And it was, I suppose, that work came to the house, didn't it? And there's a lot of emotional processing going on, as well as pedagogic innovation. And as individuals, I guess we all use the technology in more or less effective ways, but we all had to deal with a range of emotional challenges to get through it. So how did my teaching change? Because I teach in language teaching education, and I teach on an undergraduate program. So I wasn't involved in direct teaching of English. So I wasn't involved in sort of trying to generate student interaction online. But obviously in your teaching, you do want people to participate, and you do want people to engage and interact with each other. As we discussed earlier, part of the joy of working with people from different contexts is that sharing of experience. So to go online was a challenge, in that certainly I don't know what it was like for you, but to get people to switch their cameras on was quite an issue.
Well, it was an issue. I think for almost everybody around the world.
Yeah, so that kind of talking into a black screen, at times I felt a little bit like my students were fabulous, and the chat bar was always alive. But there was moments where I felt it was a bit like being a radio DJ. You were just talking out there into the night. and then suddenly something would pop up at the side. You go, oh gosh, they are there, and
They're
then fabulous ideas would come. And actually, although the mode of teaching was different online, I'd like to think that I was probably chatting quite like this a lot of the time. You know, you imagine your ideal listener, your ideal student, and you just talk to them, don't you? And then they talk back. So for me personally, I think it was quite difficult not to get to know students as personally as you would do, because as I said right at the outset, for me, the joy of teaching is to get to know people and to work with people, and to have that distance change the nature of what teaching was. It became, for me, much more. It became much more transmissive. There was a lot more me talking, probably to fill gaps when it went quiet. Whereas, when you're in a classroom and you're giving people an activity and it goes quite naturally, and that's fine. You walk around and there's engagement and this, that, and the other. When it went quiet on the screen, you're kind of sitting there, kind of.
Okay, so what am I supposed to do now?
Yeah. So there was a degree of discomfort initially. I think we all got used to it. I mean, before the pandemic, I can't imagine of sitting down and chatting to you in a podcast in a relaxed way. But we've all been our development with things like Zoom has been accelerated. I mean, how was it for you?
I think it was probably, very, very, very similar. I was used to, using Zoom a lot, but, the same issues like, black screens, and actually, I'm teaching, a few courses at the university. One of them was English language 7. So it was supposed to be really interactive, but again, and we had to be in people's homes. So for some students, it was not very comfortable because they had to share their space with more people, basically. And also, but I got to see many pets, and that's also always very cool. Every time there was a dog or a cat. But in terms of language, let's say practice, that was a little difficult at the beginning. Also, understanding that not everybody has, let's say, the same access to technology that we expect. In this ideal world, everybody has.
I think that was really interesting.
Yeah, and
we worked. There was certainly an assumption, and a necessary assumption, probably. There's an assumption that everybody had the same technological capabilities, and I don't mean that they're all as good, but they all had access to a computer at the time that the timetable was. Well, that's not the case. If you've got students where there's one computer in the house, but you've got 2 kids, then who uses the computer? That was an evident issue in terms of access. Obviously, dealing with teenagers, if they did have a computer, they don't want to switch the camera on when they're sitting in their bedroom. They just don't. I can understand that. I've got teenagers myself, and I know they didn't switch the camera on. I think my favorite thing for teaching online was so you can kind of see who's in the class, and at the end of the class you go, okay, thanks, see you, bye bye, and loads of people leave the room. In every class there was always 1 or 2 people that didn't leave the room, because they're out walking the dog, and they'd forgotten that they needed to get back in the room before the class finished. So you're kind of there, and you're looking at it, you're going, okay, the class is over, and there's no reply. It's over, no reply, and then you go, no,
they're not there.
About an hour later, I used to get an email saying, oh, sorry, I didn't realize the class had finished, and then they'd put in brackets, I apologize, I was walking the dog, and stuff like that. So that there was fun stuff. There was fun stuff.
Yeah, many. Let's say there are many anecdotes. Like people.
Yeah,
and their Microsoft on.
But I think the anecdotes build up a bigger picture of initial student discomfort. It would be very interesting for me to speak to those people who were already engaged in online learning and who didn't just transition to online learning in a way which completely tried to replicate what they already did. Because in effect, that's what I did. It's like, okay, I was lucky we have a decent platform at work called Blackboard, and that worked pretty well. But in effect, I tried to recreate the interactions and discussions that I have in class. To better or worse effect. But I would be very interested to speak to people who did something radically different with the technology, because I don't think it was a radically different experience, but I didn't try and do something radically different.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, some colleagues were like actually creating like YouTube channels and things like that, like using, let's say, some more technological stuff, or maybe actually getting high definition cameras and things like that. While others, just had a laptop, and and for them that was enough. So it also
Yeah.
depends if you're really fond of technology or not, or how much you know, because in a way
Yes.
you were forced to. And if it depended on whether you were teaching online before or not, or if it was maybe your first time teaching online, so you had to learn
Yes.
many things. And I think that was also something that, let's say, took place. And now, what are you teaching? Let's say face-to-face courses after, I don't know,
I'm
because now in Chile we also have the something similar like what you have in the UK. Is like basically living with COVID.
yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I've been back teaching face to face since September, and to start with, it was quite a strange experience because people were wearing masks and I was teaching behind a screen, and I was, for some of it I was wearing a mask, but then as you can probably tell, I talk quite quickly,
Yeah.
and when you're teaching, you're talking quickly and loudly, so you need a lot of air. So I had a mask on and I couldn't get enough oxygen. It's like, so so in the end, teaching with a mask was difficult because it's that halfway house, wasn't it? Because you still don't quite get the visual, non-verbal feedback of are they with me? But it was interesting, and I'd be interested in your perspective. After a year and a half at home, I'm not sure that students were quite. They'd lost the habit of talking in class a little bit. Some of my students, their preparedness to walk in and chat on and engage and interact and all of those things was, I think, noticeably less.
Yeah.
And
Well,
they needed to be, for want of a better word, retrained or reacquainted with the need to speak. Was that the same for you?
Well, actually, here, like the academic year starts in March, so I've been
Of course, yeah.
teaching, face to face in March, and I'm still wearing a mask inside. So we can,
Okay.
we don't wear masks, let's say, just when we're outside, outside, let's say.
Okay.
But
Oh,
yeah,
so you've not quite gone the full hog of the we have in Britain.
no, so it's not yet. But I think we're gonna go in that direction. But let's say it's something very similar. I think also for me, like sometimes the beginning classes were maybe 70 minutes long. I mean, now they are a little longer. But I think we also, for me, it was difficult to manage time. Sometimes I would say like, okay, I did way too much, or maybe I ran out of things to do, so we're just going to do something else now, because for me it was also, let's say, a little difficult, and also to see students again. And I think I agree with you, like to be reacquainted with, like, also teachers, not only students, but let's say everybody had to be reacquainted with the entire learning experience.
Yeah, I think what was quite strange was if we think of any classroom as being quite a social environment as well, where people do need to know each other and be able to engage and interact with each other, either for language learning purposes or to share their experiences of a topic or an issue. Having worked at home in isolation, the friends. So if I was to think about my sort of third year students, usually by the third year, people know each other pretty well because they spent 2 years knocking around and going to the same classes. But my current third years hadn't seen each other for a year and a half. So they didn't really know each other very well. Not in a kind of walk in and say hello kind of way. So the start of every class was quite kind of quiet and awkward. And that downtime where people, hi, how was your week? All of that, where you build the relationships which the rest of the class is founded upon. And those relationships weren't quite there. And it really brought home the importance of the social side of learning, the fact that we learn from our interlocutors or our peers, and all of those sorts of things. And so that was over time. As I say, we've now been teaching face to face for about 8 or 9 months, and you can see students easing back and into all the social processes that you would want within a classroom.
Yeah.
But those first couple of months were quite strange.
So now we're experiencing that, like since March, we're experiencing what you experienced probably last year in September. So we're going through that transition, and we can actually see that. And students are, let's say, teachers are like very tired, like exhausted, like maybe trying to find their place again.
Yeah.
Like in terms of maybe time management, and also, like you said, also in terms of oxygen, of course, but also where to, like, what to do. Let's say maybe people to just to find maybe new friends, to make new friends, to actually see your teachers for the first time in, well, for us, 2 years.
Yes, yes, and it's yeah, it's a real learning experience. I think it's a learning experience for everybody. What I would say is that obviously students, obviously, maybe not obviously, many students found it difficult, and many students perhaps think that their experience of online learning was not quite the same as face-to-face. But the degree of sympathy they offer their teachers, not sympathy, that's not empathy, for the difficult position teachers were in. Certainly, my experience was students were very generous with their perspectives of the efforts of their teachers, tutors. They knew that, I'm not talking about myself, but colleagues were thrown in at the deep end and trying at least to get this right. And we were all just going through it, weren't we? You know?
Yeah, absolutely. So now let's say the impact of, let's say, going back to face-to-face lessons. So let's say, talking about that, Graham, what do you think the future of English language teaching is? My question refers to probably maybe, are we going to go back to something like just face-to-face, or the hybrid or the online, ways to teach? Are they here to probably stay? Like, how do you see that?
That's, I could just throw in the "it depends" answer, couldn't I? I think it will vary greatly. I think, from a slightly bleak perspective, I think a lot of institutions will try to maintain hybrid models or almost entirely online models without thinking how that might be done a little bit better than it has been so far. I'm not de facto saying hybrid and online models don't work. They can work perfectly, fantastically. But I think a lot of institutions might try and see that as the future. So we're going to do it without thinking through how to make it better than it was during the pandemic. So I think there will be pressure for that. I think there's certainly a demand amongst learners for speaking to my students. They're delighted to be back at the classroom, but they also grew used to the flexibility that online learning gave them. So they're in slightly a cleft stick of loving the face-to-face stuff again, but realizing that face-to-face is not quite as flexible as online. They have to travel, they have to come into classes and things. So I think there's an unresolved tension in a lot of student attitudes and beliefs at the moment, which will work out over time. I mean, so that's something else. I think I'm certainly far more relaxed about teaching online as a teacher. I imagine most teachers are. I think I'm okay at it now. I wouldn't have even dreamt of teaching online 2 years ago. It's just not something I ever thought I would do. I didn't think I was particularly interested in it. Now I think, it's okay. It was all right. We know that online teaching can be effective, with the emphasis on can be. I suppose the question is, how do we measure its effectiveness? Has it ever true? We know that students might enjoy some online teaching. Are we convinced it has fabulous outcomes for them in terms of language learning? I'm not quite sure that's been fully researched yet. I think it ultimately, online teaching and learning will vary according to context in terms of the amount, the way it's implemented, the extent to which students enjoy it and like it, and the outcomes. It depends question.
Well, yeah, you made a good point, because probably you experience, and actually every time like Chile was going through something, we would look at England or the UK, because that's something that we were going to experience. Since right now it's kind of similar.
Really?
We're saying, like in terms of the tensions, because those are the things that are starting to happening. Students either working, or people who don't live in Santiago, who they have to, let's say, maybe commute or travel every day.
Yeah.
And also that, because that's very time consuming, spending time in, let's say, on campus, and spending basically like the entire day. And before they were used to something a little different.
there is an interesting tension. I'm going to summarize something. It's my particular perspective on it. So I'd like to think that I'm being accurate, but maybe others in British universities would differ. But a lot of British universities, certainly when we came out of the pandemic, or came out of the pandemic as far as we did last September, maintained an idea that they would like to keep quite a significant element of online teaching. And the government, in fact, said that this wasn't what should happen. So there was, and the government, certainly students in Britain, they pay quite a high fee, and it's kind of that kind of people getting value for money if it's only online sort of thing. And so there was quite a tension there between university management and what the government perceived student demands to be. And I don't think that's been clearly resolved. So we'll just have to wait and see, I guess. But it was, I wonder if people's default setting, for better or worse, is that face-to-face is what they want. But again, it depends on context.
I think there is a very interesting, let's say, research idea there, to see, let's say, what the students actually expect, and also, let's say, teachers, or if it's been, let's say, very difficult for them to basically return to face-to-face activities.
I mean, obviously, I'm talking from the perspective of somebody who came into online teaching because of the pandemic, and there's many people in our field who've worked in online teaching online teacher education for a long, long time. Nikki Hockley, Gavin Doudney, and they would have very different perspectives about how it works and its effectiveness. But if we take the many people, both teachers and learners, who were thrown into it, as it were, those are the kind of groups who it was new in the pandemic, and perhaps where technology was just keeping people going rather than being thoroughly thought through. Exactly. I suppose that's the majority of people who engaged online over the last 2 years. I do wonder what. Yes, there's a phrase in British politics. It's become a cliche. I'll try and keep this non-party political. Build back better, and I'll leave it there. But I wonder if we will build back better. In terms of technology. I'm not a technologist, so I can't say. You'd like to think we would, but you do wonder.
Absolutely. And Ram, one of the last questions I would like to ask you is, like, what areas do you think teachers should specialize in, maybe to feel or to be more prepared for the future in terms of teaching? Like, should it only be technology, or do you think maybe some other areas of linguistics, or maybe some area?
Right. I suppose it depends who and what people are teaching. So I think the big debates within the field, and I don't necessarily think this affects classroom practice per se in terms of teacher decision making yet, although I think it will come through. I think the big issues in the field are who makes the decisions that affect what goes on in education systems, and where is expertise seen as being located. I think the sort of decentering ELT movement is probably the most important thing in ELT at the moment, to give local ownership of debates and discussions and the purposes, goals, values, methodologies, and implementation of technologies, whether that's online technology or other technologies in the classroom. So I think the rise in not the rise of local expertise, that's always been there. The rise in acknowledgement of the importance of local expertise and the development of local expertise. I think that's probably, for me, that's probably the central thing that is happening and also should happen, so that we don't have people in far distant countries saying, well, this is how teaching works. And I think that revalues people, and it revalues local knowledge. I think that's one thing. I think linked to that, therefore, is the types of English we teach. What are people, which links to forms of assessment and why people are being assessed. What norms do we want people to follow? And all of this, of course, links into ideas around, I started by saying at the start of my career how privileged I was, and I was privileged because of where I was born. I think the continuing waning influence of so-called native speakers, because it's a contentious term, I think that will continue and is very positive, because it links to the rebalancing of the field in ways that are locally appropriate. None of that necessarily helps teachers in their immediate classroom decision making. If I was teaching in a school, I'd want to know how ways of keep maintaining order and discipline and doing group work. All of that kind of stuff. Having materials that are effective and engaging and motivating, all of those, and also align with the ideas we might have about language learning or language acquisition. So,
absolutely, let's say in maybe material design, also like classroom management. I think those are the main ideas that people. I think there was somebody, I think a colleague's dissertation that actually talked about that, like, in terms of methodology of ELT, what things would they have liked to be taught after teaching for some time, and, for a couple of years. And I think I remember from that study, the main question was, or the main topic was classroom management and then material design.
Well, it's really, really interesting, because I think it's fair to say that classroom management, there are a few texts and resources out there for classroom management. Tony Wright has written about it, Jim Scrivener, but compared to the focus on so many other things, I think because classroom management, of course, isn't necessarily just an ELT issue. It's for every teacher. And so I suppose you could argue, look at other aspects of the education sector and learn from that. But I do think classroom management is an underrepresented theme within ELT publications and ELT discussions. We like to talk about the new thing, online stuff, or new resources, or should we do EMI or CLIL or all these things? And they're all really, really important. But as a teacher, when you go into a class of 30, 35, 40, you want to know, how can I organize learning amongst my children to best effect so that they learn and, don't shout at each other.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, probably it's kind of similar, let's say, in that way. Probably like we in Chile now, we're facing, let's say, many problems in terms of discipline. Students been really like disruptive, do you think those issues I know you're quite new back into schools following the pandemic. Do you think those issues are potentially more challenging after the pandemic? Do you think kids have got used to not being in school and then they come in and say they want more to do their own thing? I think so. I think there are two areas there, because here, in Chile, we have there was the idea of making the school day like longer, like teaching it. But however, the idea was, let's say, that students were going to have like some sort of workshops in the afternoon, like after lunch, And I think that's like where the main tension is right now, because imagine like going to school from 8 until like 3 or 4 in the afternoon. It's a very long day. It's a very long day. And I think maybe people were not, let's say, very used to going back and, let's say, like you said, to class every day, like 5 days a week for, I don't know, so many hours. And I think that can be one of the main issues here. Like, maybe should we make the school day a little shorter, or should we have some activities online? But I think that would be very difficult to organize. But I think we're facing, every time some of my colleagues, let's say, oh, I've been having lots of problems to, let's say, teach my class because, not only because of I'm tired, but also students are tired, and also because they're complaining that they have too many things to do, let's say, for class.
Yeah. I think that I don't think I'm misrepresenting things here, but there's a slight sense that as school students have come back, I'm talking about teenagers, have come back into schools, there's a slight sense that the norms they were used to before the pandemic, as in discipline norms and ways of behaving and ways of studying and engaging, they're challenging them a little bit more because they've had 2 years at home. And I think that's a real challenge for all involved, and is probably worth as much as of a focus as whether online mechanisms can support. We're going to be face to face. How can we re-socialize if schools are built around, for better or worse, schools are built around a set of social norms, which we may agree with or not agree with, but they are. How do we get kids to fit in
Absolutely.
as a teacher.
Yeah, like to get reacquainted with those, let's say, rules. And I think those are the main challenges that, let's say,
Yeah,
some of my
yeah,
friends and colleagues who are teaching at schools, at the moment, that's what they usually say. It's like, it's been like crazy, like trying to,
yeah.
trying to have, people, working for an hour. I think it's like for them, it's enough. Having a class that's 90 minutes long, it's way too long now. So it's
Yeah.
also, let's say,
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, it seems there's similar issues in across context.
Yeah, so that's why maybe it was an interesting conversation. Also, I want to talk to people from different countries, because when we talk about these things, we realize that we're going through the same experiences. They're not, let's say, that different. Probably you, maybe in England, you had these experiences. Some people who were working at schools back in September. Now we're experiencing them in March,
Yeah,
like March,
yeah,
April, May.
yeah.
So
It is quite in a strange way. Everybody experienced it both differently and in similar ways. Yeah.
absolutely.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Absolutely. I just had, let's say, one more point, but maybe when you have some time, maybe we can have like a compilation. Usually we ask people and actually to send or to share a list of favorite, let's say, resources or materials that maybe our website they usually go to. So maybe you can share that with us.
Yeah, sure.
Later.
I can try and send some things to you. Obviously I work in areas now which are to do with research or scholarship around ELT, and obviously there's so many teacher development books, there's so many journals, but these all have paywalls or cost money. I think my one thing that I would say, and I'll send more to you, is that most authors in ELT and researchers, it seems to me, want their work to be accessible.
Yeah.
And certainly if you work in a British university, most people put up pre-publication copies of journal articles for free. They're not the final version, they're perhaps not quite the final draft, but if somebody's name crops up, who has a publication, and they work in a university, whether Britain or America or whatever, you can often find a pre-publication version, which is completely legitimate. It's not one of these, somebody's PDF'd it and stuck it on a social media platform. So that's probably what I do the most, actually. Yeah. If I can't find something because it's behind a paywall, I try and find who the author is, find out where they work, and see if they've got pre-publication. And of course, a lot of the names in our field also have copies of various publications and papers that they've done.
Absolutely.
So I think there's certainly in terms of teacher research and scholarship, there's a lot more available than we might think at first glance if we have the time. And it does take time and energy to try and dig it out.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that would be my starting point.
Yeah, that would be great if you can, let's say, maybe I can share that with our listeners, and because we also have our website, www.eltinchile.com, so I can share that there.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
So, Ram, thank you very much. So that concludes our video episode with you. Thank you very much for taking the time. I know it was a very interesting conversation, and it was, let's say, good to see that we're probably going through the same issues, experiencing the same difficulties.
It was really interesting. It's funny because it's not until you ask the question that on many occasions, it's not until you're asked a question that you know quite what you think, or you know quite what your experiences are. And so obviously I sort of, you tell me a few guidelines what we'll talk about, but then when you're actually talking, oh gosh, this is what I think about stuff. So it was really interesting for me to both find out what I think, but also to learn about the situation in Chile as well. Really great.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Graham, again.